first, let's position where we are. Let me just find my own slide here. I'm not going to show it. I'm just going to tell you. We're asking these various international e-infrastructure operators to talk about how they can interact with and participate in a global open science cloud activity. So there are a number of challenges and opportunities that we're hoping to hear from each of these folks about. I've asked specifically about resources that they might be able to bring to a global open science cloud. And in fact, our Slido poll has shown that this kind of issue is actually quite important to the folks in the workshop. I've also asked our presenters to talk about important lessons learned from any international collaborations that they have participated in so far. And lastly, I'm hoping they will help us prioritize the activities that we do need to engage in to get global open science cloud moving forward. So there's been a lot of talk in the last couple of years. The time has come for taking action, and so we need to prioritize that action. So I'm hoping to hear some guidance on those 3 points. So at that point, I'd like to turn it over to Rosie, who is with the Australian Research Data Commons. She's the Chief Executive Officer, the CEO. She'll say quite a bit about what that is, and some of you will know that this is the merger of the 3 excellent organizations, Nectar, ANZ, and RDS in Australia before, and so this is a great merger, and we'll see where that's going. And previously, she was the CEO of the Australian National Fabrication Facility, so lots of key leadership experience there. So without any more delay, Rosie, it's over to you. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Mark. It's a wonderful opportunity to participate in this conversation. Straight to the next slide, please. So thank you, Mark. You've set a little bit of the scene for the Australian Research Data Commons. It struck me yesterday that we heard people talking about a research commons. We heard people talking about clouds. The Australian Research Data Commons runs the ARDC Nectar Cloud as part of our portfolio. So it's a federated cloud service that I'm sure many of you are familiar with, federated across a number of the Australian states. Thank you. We'll stick here for a minute. And we have our purpose, very simply, to provide researchers with competitive advantage through data. And we do this with a number of activities. And I'm not going to go through most of them this evening, other than to say we're seeking to drive excellence in the creation, the analysis and the retention of high quality data assets. So that's obviously very much driving the FAIR agenda. But one of the things that struck me as we were preparing for this evening is the way that the Nectar Cloud federated across Australian states deals with many technical and cultural challenges that in a way are a scaled closed system, a scaled version of the types of challenges that we would see across the European and indeed a global open science cloud. And therefore it's useful reflecting on some of our progress to date, the challenges and future opportunities that feed into this larger conversation. I would say that we are one of a couple of dozen national research infrastructures for Australia. And I was struck that yesterday we had reference to a number of our sister organisations through those excellent presentations. So we really fit into that national collaborative research infrastructure strategy. Next slide, please. So in the context that I wanted to really provide as a foundation this evening, today, we do form part of the national e-research infrastructure in something that we describe as the digital data and e-research platforms. And you'll see other groups here, such as ARNet and the Australian Access Federation, AAF, and our Tier 1 high performance computing facilities. We come together to form a cohesive research ecosystem for Australia. And you can see here that ARDC is active in a number of different areas, and including the cloud compute infrastructure, which is really where I'll focus this evening. That's the broader landscape that we're active in. Next slide, please. I did mention that the portfolio or the breadth of ARDC activities is very broad. We drive the fair data agenda through a range of data and services activities, so the creation of the data assets, the formation of the analysis environment with the platforms. We focus on what's required in the people and policy space. Not all of the skills we would consider to be our remit, but certainly some of the skills required for engagement. And then today, as I say, focusing on the right-hand side there, we see the storage and compute portfolio. So we're concerned there with the ARDC Nectar Research Cloud, and also with the long-term retention of data assets, so collections of national significance there. And the reason I'm just spending a little bit of time on this is you'll see that many of the cultural issues that we're discussing in this meeting will be tackled through these other themes, and they are the breadth of our opportunity to collaborate. So next slide, please. The Nectar Research Cloud has been absolutely leading edge. I've mentioned that it's a federated model and supporting over 200 services across 8 different sites. You can see the history there in the number of registered users. But I'll move on from describing the capability to the next slide, please. And really looking at the lessons. And I will focus for a moment here on the benefits and pitfalls, and highlight that this distributed model allows sites to have their own business model. The co-investment and the partnerships we build allows strategic infrastructure procurement, and we run a non-consumption model. So we're aligned with the block funding that's available to researchers. So these are strengths allowing strategic research planning and infrastructure procurement. But it is, and this is the challenge that we will face more broadly, it's difficult to balance a federation agreement on a standard approach because we do want that local customization to encourage innovation. So next slide, please. Here we see some of the challenges that we are concerned with addressing in the coming months and years. And I don't think any of these will be unique to the Australian space. But I mentioned that we have a function really almost as a pilot for a global cloud infrastructure here, in that we are working to create. I'm distracted by the comments about the sheep, I have to say. They look really cute. But anyway, back to the plot. We're in a position really to be moving with new activities such as the Kubernetes, the container orchestration, that I believe are something that we can partner very carefully and completely with European activities in that space. So next slide, please. Opportunities, we've heard from others yesterday, the nature of the truly global nature of societal challenges that we face. And perhaps the one thing I would add based on yesterday's conversations, is we represent another voice from the Southern Hemisphere, and we're very pleased to bring that, and the importance of sharing, for instance, skills, best practice approaches. So we would like to inject those into the conversation. And the next slide, please. So I will conclude with this this slide that really feeds into the discussion that we'll have later this evening about where we see next steps could be. Particularly, alignment is crucial in developing standards, open source tools, best practices. I think that's a really obvious, straightforward conversation we should be taking from this evening. There is an opportunity to perhaps grow some of these global efforts in tackling specific research challenges, such as the biocommons, which relies very heavily on international access to genomics data sets. And then, for instance, the last opportunity for collaboration, we're looking at making appropriate data sets readily available in the way that's been so critical over the last 6 months for tackling the COVID pandemic that we see ourselves facing there. So with that, I think I'm scraping in at under my 10 minutes. And thank you ever so much for the opportunity to join the conversation today.
Rosie, thank you very much, primarily for staying on time, but also for some excellent points.
I prefer it the other way around, Mark.
No, some really good points. Thank you very much. And, you know, obviously tremendous capability at ARDC, and it's all of its sort of federated world and ecosystem. So we will undoubtedly be picking up some of these points. And I see that Sarah Jones has commented on one thing, but let's have our conversation after. I'm just calling out to see if we have Happy with us. We do not have Happy with us, so we're going to pick up the discussion with our next presentation. And Yin, can you remind me who is next in the batting order? Is it
Lily Zhang from?
Is it Lily? Okay.
Yeah, from Chinese.
So Lily, can you join us? Turn on your camera and.
Hello?
Hi,
Does
Lily.
it work?
Yep. Oh, Happy has just joined us, but let's.
Hello?
Yes. Hello, Lily.
Hi, Mark.
Could you please check?
I'm still trying to sort out joining from my laptop. So at the moment, I'm just joining on the phone. But
okay.
I should figure out this. So my laptop just started acting. So I'm trying to debug here. But
okay.
I will on the phone. So long.
So Happy, I'll let you continue debugging. If you could mute, I will mute you. There we go. And I think this is Lily, and I will stop talking. So everyone with a headset should turn off everyone without a headset should mute, and hopefully Lily can give her presentation. Lily, please proceed.
Hello?
Hi, Lily. Can you hear me?
Hi. Yeah, I think probably I will use my phone to deliver the talk.
Yes, the quality is good. Let's proceed.
Okay. Okay, so I'm leading from the CNIC case, and my slides to share today is about the CSTCloud Federation. Next, please. So before the quite starting, what I would like to share here is a quick look about national infrastructures, especially from the case level. For the network, we have the CSTCloud. So if it's not so late, I shall be stay in my office, and it might be better because this is at home, it's a commercial one, is shared. So pressure. Second part is about the national computing resources. We have a Chinese national grid that connects the different deployments. And we also have a case level supercomputing grid environment. And for the data perspective, after the release of the national rules, measures for managing scientific data, the culture to share data has begun to shift, such as that one of the actions is that the Ministry of Science and Technology begins to release to support the 20 national scientific data centers. And next, please. So based on all of this, what we think about is to have a kind of open architecture to have all these integrated resources integrated. And so here comes the CSTCloud. Next, please. For the CSTCloud, it's one of the national key infrastructures, and is also included in the 13th Five-Year National Informationization Plan. It could support disciplinary open research. Next, please. This slide shows the capacity of the CSTCloud from different levels, like the computing capacity, storage capacity, switching capacity for network, data sharing, and different research softwares integrated on the CSTCloud platform. Next one, please. Based on all of these different research resources, there are three different target users: individual researchers themselves, service providers, resource providers. So we provide different services for 100,000 scientific researchers in Chinese Academy of Sciences. We especially provide cloud services environment to support innovation in different disciplines, especially for big data and big computing deployment. Next, please. And based on all of this, here shows some of the examples that will support for different science programs, like what we do to support a fast Wukong, MOS, and a lot of other things. Next, please. So based on our practice so far, what we think is the researchers could make their research on the existing environment. But if after a better exploration of techniques, infrastructures, standards, policies, and even organizational things, can we get better connected in the Cloud Federation? So this way, the researchers can not only make their research in their existing cloud, but also turn to kind of universal platform for better collaboration and a larger scale of cross-disciplinary research. And as mentioned, we have mentioned and proposed the idea of the GEOS during the 2019 CODATA Beijing conference. And after that, here are 4 things we are starting to do. Next, please. As you have seen in this slide, from the data policy part, we are collaborating with CODATA. During the 2019 Beijing CODATA conference, after the joint efforts of different experts, we have released, the CODATA has released the Beijing Declaration on Research Data. That is a very good example. And after that, we are trying to be engaged into the decadal program as a practice from the geosc infrastructure perspective. And a working group is on his way. And for the other things, we are getting better connectivity through collaborations with different partners from the world. And from the AAI part, we are getting better connected with like EDOGAN and a lot of other membership things also. And based on all of this, one of the most important is we are trying to have a testbed implemented together with the support of EGI. Next, please. Based on our collaboration with EGI, the memorial of understanding says that we shall have a cloud federation testbed, and it will focus on 3 things: the interoperability based on global open science cloud, policy and mechanisms in facilitating the development of geosc, as well as some showcases. 3 of them has been identified falling into the biological structure biology, the geoscience, and another one is in space physics, and is still under construction. We probably will figure out further integration like metadata federation, online data processing, and large-scale data transfer, and a lot of things based on this testbed. Next, please. So based on all of these practices and many of them on their way, what we think as a suggestion to the development of open science in the future shows probably it could be summarized as the stair rules. The first thing is we should have a sustained model. It should be based on collaboration and benefit not only to those participants within those clouds, but also to the third-party users. And another thing is it should be transparent, because the open science means we will have a lot of things shared. Connectivity, interoperability will be the main point. And third thing is it should be agile. If we connect together, it must be a very big one. But how could we balance the efficiency, effectiveness, and a lot of other things? And the fourth is interoperability, as I mentioned. The fifth thing is resources driven. Since the open science cloud is to support the better sharing of different things within open science, we should focus on how could we have those research resources better shared during or based on those open science cloud infrastructures. And in the long term, probably there are a lot of things we are unsure, but what we are sure now is that for the global open science cloud, it may take years of effort, not only for a small group of people. We should let everybody in, and it is only based on the great efforts of everyone could we have the geosc better implemented. And for the next, please, before end of the talk, here are some of the things for the further discussion about the geosc session. Probably we will have a local training next week, and another small talk during the RDA 16 plenary. And we plan to have a CODATA convergence, have a session during the CODATA conference end of this month. So probably next year we will have the International Symposium on Open Science Cloud held in Beijing face-to-face, when it's quite safe for international travel. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Lily. That was great. Thank you so much. I'd like to move on. I'm hoping that Happy is ready to pick up his presentation. Happy, are you prepared to move forward?
Let's see. If you can hear me clearly from the phone, then I will proceed.
That's great, Happy. Carry on.
Okay. Thank you, Mark, and good morning, good afternoon to everyone. So what I would like to present is to talk about the African infrastructure for the global open science cloud. We'll chat about the challenges and opportunities. I'm from the integrated cyber infrastructure in South Africa. Next slide. So the National Integrated Cyber Infrastructure, basically we combining all the aspects of cyber infrastructure, which is the networking. We're looking at the data intensive research and also high performance computing. And the reason we're doing that, we are obviously driven by some of the large projects that South Africa is participating in. For an example, the Square Kilometer Array is one of our flagship projects that utilizes cyber infrastructure. We also run a big tier 2 CERN facility, and we've got projects like in bioinformatics, cyber infrastructure framework, climate change, and these are the 2 projects that are looking at continental requirements, including the SKA and the bioinformatics. So this is one of the motivations that we have got this asset in South Africa, and we're looking at how can we be able to work together with the other African countries. Next slide, please. So currently, in terms of the infrastructure that we have got the data infrastructure that our users can be able to use. This data infrastructure, they are linked with our HPC systems. And as you can see, the users interact with the data storage systems through IRODs. And we have got the 8 petabytes that is available to the South African research community in a process of looking at the long-term storage. So that's just part of the data infrastructure. Next slide. On the next slide, one of the key things that we're also looking at here is that across the country, we ensure that all the institutions are well connected. So we have got a backbone that connects the whole the institutions here. But you will see that we also invested on the international cable through the West Africa cable and also the CCOM. This allows us to be able to connect to Europe, to US, to the rest of the world, but also these cables pass through West Africa, so the West African countries can be able to tap into that network, and also the CCOM passing through the eastern part of Africa, and the East African country can be able to connect in there. So this forms now the basis of what we can be able to connect the countries. Next slide. So on the next slide, these are all about the systems that we have, and these are accessible to the rest of the country. The next slide. So this part is now where we have put on the cloud systems that our users are already having access to. So we have already put in, and this one here, it's an open stack, but that is based on Red Hat. And on the next slide, here, we also have got the cloud on OpenStack. This is based on CentOS, and this is also available to our users. So on the next slide, what we have already built, we have built, you will see there it's the various countries in Africa where we have deployed infrastructure. For an example, Mauritius, Namibia, Botswana, all these countries. We have deployed infrastructure, we have trained people in that. So, and there are projects already that are taking place, collaboration within Africa. On the next slide. So these are now the plans. With all this infrastructure, our plan now is to be able to build the open stack across South Africa. We already got people in astronomy, people in bioinformatics who have got some open stack. So is to federate all these clouds in the country and using the existing HPC systems now in SADC and the rest of the continent. We want to be able to develop a continent-wide federated clouds. And we believe once we have got this, we'll be able to create now an open African science platform, AOSP. And with that, the plan now for collaboration is to build now the synergy with the AOSP and connect with the rest of the world. So our plan is to be able to connect with the global open science cloud with this infrastructure. So the message here is that we have got users, we have got infrastructure that is already being built, the technologies are ready, and basically not just South Africa, but the rest of Africa is ready to be able to connect. Just some of the challenges is that some of the African countries, obviously, network is still a problem, but we believe that with this initiative, we should be able to connect everybody. Thank you, Mark. I hope I still stayed on my 5 minutes.
Happy, that was great. And thank you for your sharing your kind of where things stand and the progress that you're making in terms of connecting with other countries in Africa as well as with Europe. I know that there's a relationship between EGI and NICIS to collaborate on some joint activities. So that's a great start. We will discuss this a little bit further as we have our conversation. So Happy is the center director of NICIS, the National Cyber Infrastructure Capability in South Africa. So from his slides, you can see how he's responsible for all 3 legs of that capability. Lily was project manager for CSTCloud in the international project manager for CSTCloud in China. So a great overview of what's going on there. So now we're going to move to Natalia Manola, who is the managing director of Open Air, which is open science, a key open science capability, and she'll describe that activity for us right now and how that relates to the other pieces of infrastructure that we're discussing today. So Natalia, excuse me, are you ready to pick it up? Thank you.
Yes, can you hear me? Yes. You can hear me.
Yes, you're great. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you for the invitation. And I think that what the other presenters presented is of key essence. What I would like to say is that I'm not going to talk about the cloud because we are an open science infrastructure approaching from the scholarly communication perspective. But we ourselves, as an infrastructure with big data processes, we are in need of what is being built around the world, and this is great. So next slide, please. So I'm not going to go deeply onto this. You know, we all know why we need open science, better research, reproducibility, etc. But what is evident in the past years is that we are moving from open access to open science, and I think we are all now in it together and to learn what it actually means. So it's not what I would say is that it's not just about having access to knowledge, but it's about actionable and sustainable knowledge. We heard about retention of data, we heard about connection of data and cloud services. So this is what it is about. So it is here to stay, and what we are thinking in Open Air, because Europe is a beast, I would say, in how we are approaching it, because we have different countries. It's here to stay, but how can we achieve it in a way that it's open to all, so everyone has access to open science resources, to scientific resources, equitable, transparent, and trusted. And I think this is when we're talking about an open global commons, this is something that we all need to have in mind. We need to work together and we need to put these principles in place. Next slide, please. So what are the way we see it, what are the key features, towards a global science commons, whatever we want to call it, global open science cloud. So it's time to act at different levels. We saw the national, presented. We see some regional, Europe is regional, and then we go to the global. So what we need to do is we need to start thinking not just about the cloud services. The first presenter talked about the people. I think it's about also policies, technologies, and the people are key. So it was really great to see that as the first entry. We are talking about decentralized, common values, no lock-in situations. We like commercial providers, but we don't want lock-in situations, and we need to think about share benefits. And if we think about sustainable knowledge and sustainable infrastructures, it would be great for all of us to see to work perhaps under the SDG and SDGs, and a global science commons is true that it cannot exist without open science, and this is something that we need to have in mind. So, next slide, and just a preface is how we are approaching this through OpenAIRE, the global approach. And as I said in the beginning, we are approaching it through scholarly communication. Next slide. 3 main pillars of actions that I want to highlight here. First of all is that we're trying to build synergies with regional networks. On metadata exchange, for example, people discussed about data exchange. Let's start with the basics, but also best practices. Then our second pillar of action is that producing tools for the global community. Research is global. Researchers work together in a collaborative way. So what we aim to do, and what we should all aim to do, is to produce tools that we can share and we can put it out there for the global communities. And then in OpenAIRE and in scholarly communication, what is important is that we are using resources. Now they are paid and locked in resources. So our aim is to co-produce with other regions around the world global resources that are open to the community, and I will just bring attention to that. But what is important again is the building synergies. And the lesson learned, because you asked about the lesson learned, is that we need to realize that not everyone is on the same speed. So, we see the Australia data services, which are very much advanced. Some of the countries in Europe, we envy what you have, but we need to be patient in order to bring it forward. And we need to work together to help each other, through networking. But also, one of the important things is not just about the technology, and also, the social aspect. One of the lessons learned is that what we need to work together is to make sure that there is commitment from the governments on building that, because this is something to be sustained, and this is something that requires commitment through funding and resources. And this is a key message that I would like to convey. So if I may explain, next slide, to the 3 main pillars of action. Next slide. Okay, and if you can go, okay, is what we are doing in OpenAIRE. We say that our focus is on Europe. We are trying to have this network around Europe. We call them national open access desks, and they are ambassadors of open science and representatives in every European member. But what we would like to see is that as Europe has built a network, we would like to see other regions or other countries to build the networks. So we get together and depending on each layer of this open science cloud, we work together. For example, OpenAIRE has built synergies with some of these initiatives around the world. And what I would like to say is that initiatives, in our experience, they bring results when these synergies, they have concrete targets to work with. And this is something we can have collaborations, we can exchange best practices, but at some point, onwards is that we need to really do something together, bilateral, synergies, and then towards working on the global commons. Next slide. So what from OpenAIRE, our starting point is, metadata, because we're building, I will explain what we're trying to build. So one of the ways that, we found very early on from the publications and repositories of publications at institutions is that they could have their own system, but then, in order to make it visible and to collaborate for discovery, for visibility, metadata was the first one. So we started with the OpenAIRE guidelines for literature in repositories, and then we went on to journal, and then working with the community, because this is very important. So for OpenAIRE guidelines for data repositories is an addition of DataCite. For software, we have worked with software heritage, with CRIS systems, with EuroCRIS, and with usage statistics with Counter. And many of them, you will see that they are under the RDA umbrella, because RDA for us is one of the venues that, is a forum where we can bring together players around the world. So starting from these basics, we have what we have achieved is through the OpenAIRE guidelines is to make sure that there is a minimal metadata set that we can exchange data, and this is good, for discovery, for early discovery, not going down into science, but for exchanging information. And this is the first step. So what we would like to see is commons under such structures that they follow, from a minimal set to a more, when you go to domain specificity, to a more elaborate set of metadata. Next slide. So then this was the first thing is, synergies with global networks. And, concretely, we started with, metadata. Then we are in the position of producing tools for the global community. Next slide. Here I'm presenting just okay, before that is that what we are doing here is that services are not just for researchers, but they are for the whole range of stakeholders and actors involved in the research process. So next slide is that you will see that OpenAIRE has, if you go on, is that we have a bunch of services, infrastructural services or services for end users. But what is important is that these services are put out into the global commons and they can be used. And last, because time is short, and the last pillar of action that we are doing is, next slide, is that we are in the position to work with actors around the world in co-producing global assets for scholarly communication. And in the next slide, you're going to see that now our focus is on the OpenAIRE research graph. If you see on the slide, we have repositories, journals, data repositories, software repositories, together with other authoritative global sources around the world. And we're building an open scholarly communication resource that could be used for discovery, could be used for monitoring, could be used for research communities to have use on their domain. So, but what is it important in here is that we are building this research graph at a level of I would say the scholarly communication. But what we would be expecting is that there are many other communities that they are building their graphs, their knowledge graph based on their domains, and that we can all hook it up together in order to have a global interlinked open science system. So these are the things that we are working on. And I think Mark is telling me to finish up. This was my last slide. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natalia. Great presentation. Lots of interesting points which we'll try to bring together. So I think our next presentation is from Tiziana, who is the director of the EGI Foundation, which is used to be known as the European Grid Infrastructure, but I'm not allowed to say that. So lots of familiarity about how to make this work. So without further ado, Dr. Ferrari.
Thanks, Mark. I hope you can hear me fine. Yes.
You're good.
So with this presentation, I'd like to give you some information on how EGI has been supporting international user communities, what were the success stories in the last 15 years, but also the difficulties and the gaps that we have been encountering in increasing the scale of what we could do to support international global science. So in the next slide, you will see that as European infrastructure for data-driven computing and intensive exabyte level scale processing, our core user communities are international groups that need to process and analyze data across Europe and also with other continents and international institutes. Our vision is that researchers should have seamless access to all the resources that they need for their scientific processes, data being prominent together with publications, instruments, but also the technical infrastructure. And here is the role of EGI, like computing and storage, to extract knowledge and science out of these research objects. And in the past 15 years, we have been managing to support hundreds of international user communities, reaching a scientific impact of about 2,000 open access publications per year, and about 71,000 registered users worldwide. In the next slide, I'd like to also give you a view of how scientific communities have been reaping the benefits of scientific computing at worldwide scale. We have a very strong level of maturity in physical sciences, and this is also due to the fact that in this specific branch of science, there is already a practice for decades in international collaboration. So they have been quite successful due to the way they do their science in pooling and connecting all these infrastructures they need for their science. But we see definitely a new wave of scientific disciplines that are more and more challenged by data. And I'd like to mention earth science, which is in the EGI experience, the scientific domain where cloud services and data access through cloud services is more beneficial, but also social sciences and humanities that are growing in readiness and maturity in their data integration, and they're moving from data integration into provisioning of services for data analysis. In the next slide, I'd like to give you a view of who are these large international enterprises in research that we've been supporting. The logos here on the slide show who are the biggest user communities in terms of volume of computing and storage, which is being federated worldwide. I've picked those that concern America, Africa, Europe, as well as in the Asia-Pacific region. These are international user communities that have been succeeding in pooling capacity and the data internationally. And this diagram shows the trend in accounting in the whole EGI Federation that today includes about 250 data centers worldwide, how scientific computing has been driven by the scientific discoveries of organizations working in high energy physics, astronomy, astrophysics, and many other international endeavors, which by construction have required collaboration internationally. The level that these communities have reached is hundreds of international institutes, tens of countries working together, focusing on the same scientific challenge, and thousands of researchers worldwide. So I would say we have already, as infrastructure representatives in this meeting, we have already a success to leverage, but definitely also big challenges ahead of us. One of the challenging areas, and in the next slide, I'm presenting a case which is very different from the scientific communities I've presented before. It's about supporting communities of practice. So I've mentioned that many international scientific collaborations are sufficiently well organized to succeed in opening infrastructures for their scientific purposes. But in communities of practice, this is way harder because these communities typically gather around the data, around the scientific applications, and they don't have longer-term projects that internationally provide a governance for their collaboration. These are probably the largest user group, at least from the EGI perspective, which is today not properly served. And the reason is that we lack a governance to open up our infrastructure to serve them up to the requirements that they have. In this community of practice, which is structural biology, I would probably mention this as being the biggest success story in EGI. This community has reached a level which is even bigger than those scientific collaborations that I've mentioned before. Thanks to bilateral agreements with the United States, with Asia Pacific and Latin America, we have pooled resources for them. We have bilateral agreements which allow scientists from everywhere in the world to use their simulation tools, which are supported by an infrastructure layer where bilaterally infrastructures in the world come together, recognizing the value of this community and bringing capacity to support this open access. Without these bilateral agreements, it would be impossible for scientists like in structural biology in this case, where only 25% of the users are European, the rest is from other continents, as the diagram shows. It would be impossible to support them in a coordinated manner and open scientific applications which would be otherwise only accessible in Europe or to specific countries in Europe. So how have we achieved this? In the next slide, of course, creating a governance in Europe. So for EGI, we are a membership organization, 26 from January, where national organizations are leveraging national funding and federating it at European level. But this is not sufficient to support the collaborations internationally. And in the next slide, you can see how this worldwide federation has been constructed by having bilateral agreements with as many partners as possible in the world. I think we have already heard in the other presentations, like the one from our Chinese colleagues, from Natalia, from Australia, how these bilateral agreements are important. In the next slide, I'd like to mention what are the key elements in our experience as computation and infrastructure that are necessary to have successful scientific collaborations at international level. This community needed to have a community level governance, without which it's very hard to have homogeneous access policies and agreed access policies to data and to the software to process the data. One of the biggest barriers we need to face is that our national infrastructures in Europe, but also worldwide, are typically funded to serve the national user communities, which means they are not open by default, or at least a part of their capacity is not open by default. And I think Natalia in the previous presentation already mentioned the importance of creating a global infrastructure which can be accessible, made available to user communities that are not strictly related in terms of funding to specific national funding agencies. Collaborations are also enabled by seamless access policies, and across all the federation members, these policies have to be agreed. For example, there must be pledged capacity, which is agreed. This is particularly important in computing because computing is depletable. So we cannot support infinite number of users, so there must be agreed capacity allocated by the providers to the user communities. We need service level agreements, but also interoperation. When I use the word interoperation, I mean not interoperability, which is not just about using the same standards, which is sometimes impossible across communities or not even achievable across infrastructure. Interoperation means having higher level services which create a glue, which allows users to access infrastructures which are intrinsically heterogeneous. We need some form of coordinated service management. So users need to be supported in a coordinated manner when they are international. And that means the providers have to find a way to do this. Usage has to be accounted for to create an impact and also to make a case for funding agencies. Security has to be coordinated. For example, incident response, where we have security as a concern in the assets which are being federated. And interoperable trust and identity frameworks are a necessary requirement for secure access to data, to applications and infrastructures. In the next slide, I'd like to conclude with 3 other gaps that we feel as EGI are still to be addressed internationally. First, I've mentioned before these bilateral agreements. We have this larger portfolio, but this really doesn't scale a lot. What we have found, for example, is by collaborating with OpenAir, with GEAN, but also other partners, we can leverage their networks and we can reach out to our peers in other continents more easily if we can coordinate at continent level, at least in Europe. At international level, we don't have governance a way where all these infrastructures can come together and discuss the strategies and cooperate. We still have a lot of bilateral agreements, which means there is a long lead time when we have user communities that have requirements to the point when there is a coordinated infrastructure available for them to be used. This lead time can be years, which is not accessible and not acceptable for modern science. So there is definitely an improvement there. We need some form of organization, coordinated human networks, the social aspect, having experts that work together to support user communities is necessary, because infrastructures are necessarily heterogeneous, the data repositories are heterogeneous, and if there is no coordinated support, then effective usage is very hard. And last but not least, the access policies. We still see a major blocker when we have an international user community with interest in data in the United States, Europe, China, or other regions. The first question is, how do I analyze this data? Typically, this data is so large in many cases and in many sciences that it cannot be downloaded in the local lab. It has to be processed where the data is available. And that means having access to additional infrastructure capacity, which is coming together with the data, which is very hard to organize at international level. This is why having open infrastructure policies next to open access policies to data and publications is also key. And for us is one of the major hurdles that we need to tackle together. We hope that through the European Open Science Cloud, this is going to improve in Europe, and we see an opportunity in this global effort that we're discussing in this workshop to be able to scale up our efforts at international level. And with this, I've completed my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Tiziana. Lots of great points for us to chew on, if you will. So our next and final presenter will be Eric Hauser from GEAN, the CEO of GEAN. And before he starts, I want to advise people that there is a bit of a poll going on, which has a number of questions, a number of priorities that we have suggested for consideration for the group as priority tasks. So I would encourage this group, this session of experts, to take a look at this, to add your voice. If you haven't already done this, I'm going to post it in the chat right now, if I can make my cursor do what it's supposed to do. So I would encourage you to take a quick look at that and to offer your input to that. And now, without further ado, Eric Hauser, and over to you. Can you just say hello and make sure your speaker's working?
Hello.
Perfect. On we go.
I'd like to add a bit of the lessons learned from the what I would call the Global Research and Education Network. Next slide, please. Now, you might not have heard from the Global Research and Education Network, and that's because it's not a formal organization. And that is, I think, one of the biggest lessons learned. What you see here is the international connectivity that Géant has. Not all of these lines are fully owned by Géant. A lot of these lines are only partly owned by Géant, and we share them with other research and education networks, be they national, regional, or continental in the world. We work together to share our costs and to share the capacity. One of the notable projects there is the Bella project, which we're currently are the launching customer for a totally new subsea cable going between Portugal and Brazil, which will increase the capacity for cooperation between Latin America research and European research, and will allow European researchers to access the telescopes in Chile. Next slide, please. This one shows you how we share the capacity that we have with other continental and regional research and education networks in the world. And together we form what we call the GREN, the Global Research and Education Network. So we create a federated worldwide network that is purely based on sharing in the same way that the internet is based on sharing capacity and allowing others to use your resources. This is done almost without any bilateral agreements. This is done on mutual recognition that if I can use your stuff and you can use my stuff, both of us have a win-win there. And this global research and education network, you can drill down in how that gets all the way to the user, which will be shown in the next slide. You will see our European network that we have and we're currently building out that covers all the countries. So this global research and education network, we bring that all the way into Europe to the national research and education networks in Europe. And in this, we again share capacity and cooperate with, next please, with Nordinet, who are building their next generation network in the Scandinavian countries, which seamlessly integrates into the Géant network and into the global research and education network. Next slide, please. And of course, if you dive down even deeper, you go into a country. In this case, I took Sweden as an example. You get into the National Research and Education Network that will connect all the research institutes and all the universities inside Sweden through SUNET. This global research and education network, where we share all capacity and each other's resources, makes sure that anybody from any university in Sweden can use the same resources that anybody can use in China, who is on the Chinese CERNet network. Hereby, we have created an infrastructure that is fully capable of supporting a global open science cloud. And on top of this network infrastructure, we support on a global scale services like EduRoam, EduGain to make sure that also access to a global open science cloud is guaranteed or can be guaranteed. And we support, again, on a global scale, security services to make sure that the access to the global open science cloud can be as secure as possible. All this is done on very much on a basis of trust, and also on the recognition, like I said before, if we share, we together grow bigger rather than being on our own island and doing our own stuff. And I think a global open science cloud should be based on that same principle as much as possible. And I do realize that if you get higher up in the stack, you need more agreements, like Tiziana referred to, you need more governance there than this global research and education network, which has hardly any governance and is mostly done at a community level by working in working groups and task forces. I hope that with this global research and education network, we are ready to support this global open science cloud federation, interoperability, shared standards, and a close collaboration, because that will be the key to success for this global open science cloud. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Eric. Excellent, excellent exploration from the networking perspective. So we have, I believe, completed all of our presentations. We are still have about 20 minutes for panel discussion and questions and answers. So I would invite our attendees to post any questions they have in the chat. Or raise your hand if you wish to speak directly, if you'd rather not type in your question. So I look forward to that. And while people are thinking about their any questions they might have, I have some questions. So I'd like to turn back to, I guess, the questions that I'd raised, which is the key priorities for getting the global open science cloud started. And we have some of those answers, but I guess I'm going to put everybody on the spot and ask them to pick the one thing that they think is the most important thing to work on tomorrow to move the global open science cloud tomorrow. So I'm going to go around in the order, the originally scheduled order of our presentations, and ask each of our panelists to vote for one. So it's a hard choice. So first, Happy, what would be the first thing you would ask the community to work on to make the global open science cloud work? Are you there? There he is. It looks like he got his laptop working, or he turned his phone on the side. You need to unmute. Can't seem to unmute you. Oh, okay, let's, oh, he's got a, Happy? Are you there? Okay, so I'm going to move on quickly. Rosie, Rosie, what's your answer to this?
Can you hear me, Mark?
I can hear you now. Happy, yes, please. What's your one priority?
I think the main thing that one will look at is to look at having proper collaboration agreements in place. And the reason I go for that is that I think we have got the technology right. Technology has been tested. We have got applications that can be able to drive the global open science cloud. And what requires is more organizational arrangements. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Rosie, what's your top priority?
I'm going to give what I feel to be a very pragmatic answer. I think that when we're dealing with these things, we're dealing with both the technical and the cultural challenges, and they involve us in different ways with the top-down and bottom-up aspects. From a considerable amount of time with international collaborations, I would really like to suggest that we identify some pilot scientific challenges that will unite us and use them as opportunities to address the technical challenges and cultural issues as we work to solve shared scientific challenges.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I'm just writing things in the notes here for people. So let's go. Thank you very much, Rosie. So I think the next was Lily. Are you able to speak? I hope your microphone's going to cooperate.
Hello? Hello? Hello?
Yes.
Hello? Hello?
Yes, Lily.
Yes, quite similar for this question. I think we would like to employ the bottom-up approach, but I think we will have a implementation of a lightweight test bed. For the demonstration, we will encounter a lot of questions about interoperability, like the policy level, the semantic level, the technical level, or even the community level. So if we can have a collaboration based on a certain kind of test bed demonstration, we will encounter different dimensions of problems and try to find a solution or a way forward by kind of such test. It could help us put everything forward a little bit. Yeah, and another thing, I think the most big challenges for the geoscape, as GZ Anna has mentioned, probably might be the sustainability, because it is the international collaboration. It will make the existing cloud have more possibility of larger scale research and a larger scale of collaboration. But we need sustained funding stream to support such kind of collaboration, because open science also have the cost to open everything. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Lily. Excellent. Natalia?
Yes, I think, and I will talk about the top level. I think I would agree with Lily that interoperability is the key. Also, the sustainable funding. As I said, commitment is needed. What I would like also to comment is on the cultural change. We all know that we need cultural change, but I have been in this environment for the past 12 years, and this is what we have been talking from day one. So what I would think, one of the things that we know it's important, but we don't know how to tackle it on a global level, and I don't think it's very, very possible. So what I would like also to say is that, based on also Rosie's, it's not just about putting out there a use case of a scientific data-driven case, because there are many, from astrophysics to COVID. But what I would like, the global community is to put some services in as global resources and see how they can be used. So I think, interoperability, commitment for funding, and a pilot case which will actually tackle the services.
Okay, thank you. You answered my trick question with a trick answer, but anyway, Tatiana?
I like the pragmatic approach suggested by Rosie for the EGI experience. Technical interoperability in our technical domain is not the key issue. The adoption of open standards or community standards has been a practical way to tackle these if there is a willingness in doing so. What we are lacking is the structure where we can define our international priorities and supporting international science in a coordinated manner. So I like to sustain this approach bottom-up. But Rosie, before we can agree on what are the practical priorities in coordinating our efforts, we need a place where we can come together and discuss this. So I'm lacking perhaps as a first thing, a place where international research organizations and infrastructure providers can meet scientific communities and define coordinated priorities in their support. RDA was mentioned by Natalia as existing a good international platform. This would be from a European point of view for EOSC, definitely a very important pillar, which is existing and we should leverage. What I like to emphasize is the need to have coordinated efforts and to have a place where our coordinated efforts and priorities can be discussed.
Perfect. Thank you, Tatiana. Eric, what is your one priority?
Well, I could easily say all of the above. That would be one, but I would go for building the community of trust. There's none of all the other things you can't do if you don't have the community of trust. And so you need to start building this community of trust on a global level. And that is particularly hard to do now in COVID times when nobody can travel. And so that's a huge challenge. But I think you need to build that first. And then on top of that, you can discuss standards. You can see how you want to organize service delivery, how you want to deal with data access and everything. But you first need that community of trust. You need to make sure that there's a global community that trusts each other, that's willing to do a federated approach. So building the community of trust.
And a quick follow-up, Eric. What would you say is the best first step in helping to build that community of trust in the absence of having a beer together?
Well, having a beer together is usually the best way to do it. So that makes it really hard. I think you need to try and use a global platform for that, and RDA, in my view, would be a possible way to start there, and work with RDA to start building that trust. And you can do that by Rosie's practical approach, that she suggested, to take some of the quick wins and start working on that and build. If you get success, you hopefully build that trust.
Perfect. Okay, thank you, Eric. I really appreciate that from all of you. Great input. Any questions? I've been typing away in the chat, but haven't seen any questions from people. Okay, I know that our RDA has got a good, actually an interesting, there's the Global Open Research Commons interest group, which I know we've got a few members of that interest group participating here. I saw Karina and I see notes from Sarah. I think Andrew Trelaw is also on the session. So I don't know which of you might be a leader of that activity. I know, Karina, you spoke about that earlier. I think there may be some good things and some bad things, because one of the points that was made in the questionnaire, the Slido questionnaire, was that issues about access to infrastructure, access policies, technical standards, as well as some other technical issues which typically aren't discussed at RDA, Those seem to be key points for many of the people who provided their input on this. I was wondering if some of the RDA interest group participants might offer some viewpoints on this. I'll take that as a no for now. And I see Sarah's point. Should the human aspects be addressed more in our priority? Yes. Oh, Sarah, you can't speak? Well, why can't you speak? Let her speak. Are you there, Sarah?
Can you hear me
there
now?
We go.
I think I've
Yes,
been
go.
unmuted. Yeah. Okay, sure. Yeah, so I mean, that RDA group stems from a series of BOFs which various people in this activity have been involved in as well, like Simon Hodson and others. And I think, as you say, the groups may be addressing more of the overarching definitions and how you collaborate. So maybe more of those human aspects than the remit you have here in the priority list. That's one of the things that struck me, that you've got a lot about things like standards, and there is a bit about governance and policy, but maybe I think the two groups or the two activities are quite complementary. What else to say about that? I know Andrew's on the call too. He might want to make some comments.
Sarah, I think Andrew's left us for an RDA meeting.
Ah, okay. Yeah, I think it's either TAB or council today, isn't it? Okay.
Yeah.
But no, I think it would be good if we have more join up across these initiatives. So happy to be here, and good to hear the discussion going on. I think in terms of RDA groups, you mentioned about the technical aspects. I mean, there are various groups that are looking at standards. They're looking at, how you, move data around. There's a BOF coming up that one part of the NREN community's put together about data movement. So I think some of those technical aspects are addressed, but it's definitely good to make sure we have overlap between these different fora.
Perhaps what I like to see, if I can echo the point of Sarah, is also not to just have a group where things are being discussed, but where there is also commitment to prioritize and work together. So that essentially after workshops like the one we're having today, then we have concrete actions and a structure, which can be working groups or task forces, as suggested by Eric, where interested organizations in a bottom-up manner can have work done. As we heard from the communities yesterday, there is a sense of urgency, a need of international data sharing, having enough technical software to extract the knowledge from the data and the necessary capacity to do that at larger scale. So there is need for action now.
If I may, Mark?
Just to make a quick point, and that is, luckily, as chance would have it, we have a session that will start in about half an hour, 40 minutes, that is dedicated to putting together that action plan and hopefully getting people to raise their hands and say, I'm going to do some real work. So Tatiana will be chairing that session, and I look forward to all of you showing up and raising your hands and taking on some actual work to do. So I'm sorry, I couldn't even tell who was speaking. Please go ahead.
No, it was Natalia speaking. So I would like to, to see that it's a hard problem getting all the right people around the table, because the way I see it is, for example, in RDA, because we are part also of that group, it's a bottom-up approach where we say, what is the action plan? Then you need a forum, for example, on the government level, where we say, how do these people come together in order to commit? Because funding, you can have the technical interoperability solutions, but somebody has to commit to making this work. And then on the top level, and I think this is a good initiative that we've seen, is that UN has been involved through UNESCO in this bringing open science to to the countries. And if you've seen the latest agreement between two top UN units, which they have the power to bring it forward at a policy level. So what I'm trying to say is that we need different kind of fora to make it work. Policy is one, funding and commitment is the other, and the technical technical discussions on another level. So I see that RDA can be an excellent venue for the lower level, but we need to think of how we can discuss on the others.
I'm trying to unmute Lily, who's trying to get a word in here. For some reason, it's very difficult to do it. So thank you, Natalia. I think that's a great point. Lily, I'm trying.
Sorry, nothing. I'm just handling my phone. But I agree that most of these excellent ideas, especially that to build the trust worldwide. But my question is, how could we quick, like a kind of worldwide trustworthy mechanism?
How can we what? A trustworthy mechanism? Please say that again.
Build up a. How can we build a kind of worldwide trustworthy mechanism?
Well, it seems that the first step, if I understand correctly, is that we need to meet virtually, if necessary, to get the people who are prepared to do some work, to get their tools out and spend a little time and maybe a little money to make things happen. We need those people together in a room to get some things done. So I would like to suggest that our session that will start in 31 minutes, which will be chaired again by Tiziana, would be a great place to have that conversation, a starting point. That was exactly our objective when we created this workshop, was to have exactly this kind of conversation, agree on priorities, identify tasks, and get people to commit to doing some of the work. So I do hope that folks will participate, come back and participate after they've prepared their midnight snack in the case of Southeast Asia and Asia, or breakfast in my case, or lunch where you are. So, and I see Simon has raised some good points that the CAS-funded GOS project provides some horsepower, if you will, for getting some of that work done. So we are a minute over. I know that people do have to have their respective meals, and maybe it's a nightcap if you're if it's 11 p.m. or 12 p.m. But I hope that people will rejoin us and participate in this working session this afternoon. Any other last points?
Just I hope we can continue in half an hour the discussion in the following session. So looking forward to see you back after the break.
Thank you very much. See you all soon.
Thank you, Mark.
Really
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you. Finally, we managed with some problem, but this international connection finally works. Okay, have a good lunch.
We've got there. We've got there. Thanks very much.
Thank you. You can keep connecting. We will use the same room half an hour later.